Before we start, I want to give a shout out to my wonderful Patreon supporters and channel members who are helping me to continue making videos here, as well as to allow me to keep providing you with free lessons and content. And if you are also interested in becoming a supporter of mine, I'll have links in the description box below where you can do that. I'm sure all of you know the sentence connectors 고 and 지만. Well, you should know those before watching this video. So using these connectors, we can make two sentences with our example. 김치가 맵고 맛있어요. So 김치 맵고 is spicy, 고, and 맛있어요. It tastes good. Or we can make 김치가 맵지만. So 지만 meaning but. So kimchi is spicy, but it tastes good. But today's lesson is not about these two markers, which you already know, but about another more common and more useful sentence connector, the 대 form. You've probably seen this before. In fact, maybe you've used it before. But today I want to help you to use it better. Because not only is the 대 form more commonly used than 고 or 지만, it also sounds a lot more natural in regular speech. In fact, the 대 form can be used in place of both the 고 and 지만 sentence endings. Yes, I'm saying that the 대 form means both and but. But first, how do we make this 대 form? And this is the most common mistake that I see beginning learners make, because the way that you conjugate this form actually depends on several things, mainly whether the verb that you're using it with is an action verb or a descriptive verb. So let me cover how to conjugate it. For descriptive verbs, that is any verb that's not doing something, but that's just being used to describe something, the first thing you do is you take the verb stem. So let's just take the verb 작다, to be small, for example. The stem is everything up until this part, which we just remove. Now note that if the verb you're starting with ends with anything else besides 다, it's going to give you something completely wrong. For example, the verb 가르치다, to teach, becomes 가르쳐요, and I've seen beginners do something where they take a verb that's already conjugated and then remove the ending, and they're left with something which is, well, it's just completely wrong. So don't do that. Start with the original verb. So you look at the verb stem, and then you're going to add one of these, either un or just a nian. And then you'll add 대. Now, if the verb stem, here it's 작, if the verb stem ends with a consonant, then you're just going to attach un and 대. But if the verb stem ends with a vowel, then you're going to attach just a nian followed by 대. So let me give you two quick examples. First, 고프다. We take the stem and we get 고프, which ends with a vowel, so we attach 고픈데, and we're done. 좋다, to be good, we get the stem, and we're left with this, which ends with a consonant, so we attach 좋은데. And that's really all there is to it for the most part. Now, I have something that could be a huge shortcut for you. If you are already familiar with conjugating verbs into adjectives, basically making adjectives in the present tense, here it's the exact same thing. For example, if you know how to take the descriptive verb for small and say a small house, 작은 집, it's the same thing that you're doing here, except attaching 대 to the end. So if you can say a cute cat, 귀여운 고양이, well, now you can say 귀여운 대, and you're done. And all of the conjugation rules that go into that, along with exceptions, also go into here as well for the present tense. And if you're not already familiar with that, or you want another review, I'll also link two videos in the description box below that tell you how you can conjugate verbs, both action verbs and descriptive verbs, into adjectives. I should note, though, that any conjugation exceptions that you would make when conjugating adjectives also apply here too. For example, once you get the stem, and the stem is this letter, lir, you have to drop it first. So you're left with 뭐, which ends with a vowel, and you get 뭔데. Another common exception is with this letter. Anytime the stem ends with this, most of the time it's an exception. For example, 춥다, to feel cold, you get the stem, it's left with this, so you have to remove it, and you get chu. But then for this one, not only do you remove it, but you also attach the syllable u. So you get chu-u and then chunde. And there are a few other common exceptions that you'll have to keep in mind when you're conjugating, especially descriptive verbs, but those are also in the videos that I linked below. Okay, so now let's go on to action verbs. For action verbs, it's much more simple. You simply take the verb stem, just like before, so let's take 하다, then you attach 는, followed by 대, and you're done. And again, this is the same thing you do when you're making an adjective out of an action verb. You simply attach 는 to the end. Now I should say this again. This is for action verbs. A really common mistake that I see, and I mentioned this already, is using the wrong type of conjugation for the wrong type of verb. So I'll commonly see beginners adding 는 to descriptive verbs or un or a nian to action verbs like that. Note though, however, there are also a few exceptions, just like before. The verbs 있다 and 없다, to exist and to not exist, they seem like they would be descriptive verbs, but they're actually conjugated like action verbs. So you'll get 있는데 or 없는데. And there are a few other exceptions for conjugation, like there are with any verbs. If you have a verb stem that ends with a lir, you're going to remove it first. But besides that, it's the same as when you're conjugating any action verb into an adjective. All of this is just though for making the present tense, which is, to be fair, the most common tense you'll use. But fortunately, the past tense and future tense with the 대 form are much simpler. For the past tense, it doesn't matter whether you're working with an action verb or a descriptive verb, you simply get the past tense verb stem and then you'll attach 는데. So what is the past tense verb stem? Well, that's what you would normally get when you conjugate any verb into the past tense, and then you cut off everything after you reach these letters at the bottom. For example, 하다 would become 했어요. So once you get here, that is the stem and you attach 는데 and you're done. And since you've already applied any exceptions while conjugating this, you don't have to do anything additional in order to get the 대 form. And the same goes for future tense. For future tense, you can either use the 것이다 form, like 할 거야, for making the future tense form and simply attach 대, or you can use the 겠다 ending, get the stem, get, attach 는데, 겠는데, and you're done. So now we've talked about how to make this form, let's talk a little bit more about how it's used. So why would someone want to use the 대 form in the first place when you can already use the 고 or the 지만 sentence connectors? Well, the 대 form shows contrast between two parts of a sentence. And a good way that you can think about this is it's like you're holding up your palms in the air. You're saying, here's one part of the sentence and here's the other part. So here's information, and on the other hand, here's other information. So in that way, it's used in the same way as either saying and or saying but. For example, I like Korea, and on the other hand, I also like living in the US with more variety of fast food. It can be and or it could be but, depending on how you look at it. But the main purpose is that you're showing contrast between two ideas. Now, the 고 and 지만 forms are still used all the time, but they do sound a bit stronger. For example, like saying, and also, or however. The 대 form sounds much more soft and therefore more natural for regular conversations. So the 대 form, I said, can be used in place of either the 고 or the 지만 form. It also has a softer sound and it tends to sound a bit more natural in regular conversation. So let me give you an example that we started with. 김치가 매운데, from 맵다 to be spicy like before, 맛있어요. It tastes good. What we have here is kimchi is spicy, but, or and, on the other hand, it tastes really good. Kimchi is spicy, it tastes really good. So this can mean either and or but or both, It doesn't really matter. The point is that it's contrasting the two parts of the sentence. But that's not the only place you'll see the 대 form used. So then where else is this 대 form used? Well, it's also commonly used when you're going to explain something. So you would start your sentence and end it with the 대 form, and then continue on and say what you're going to explain. Again, imagine that you're holding up your palm. By holding up your palm, it tells the listener that you're going to present some information to them. You're going to explain something to them. Almost like saying, hey, here, look at this. I have something to show you. So it's often used at the beginning of an explanation. You can have the first sentence that you say be something that ends with this 대 form. Now, if you're going to end a sentence, you also want to attach 요 to the 대 form. So don't just say something something 대, but you would want to say something something 대요. That way you're polite. So let me give you an example. 질문이 있는데요. So I have a question. 대요. You don't need to translate this as and or but, because in this situation, it's simply being used to start explaining something. 질문, a question. So I have a question. You're starting to explain something and you're letting the listener know that more is to come. But there's another way that this 대 form also gets used, and that's when you're going to emphasize something. So you can add extra emphasis to your sentence simply by adding it to the end of your sentence and then not continuing on right after. For example, I wrote over my face here, 너무 맛있는데요? 너무, so much or too much. So it's so good. Now you're not just saying 너무 맛있어요. It's so good, but you're adding emphasis by putting 대요 at the end. It's kind of like still you're holding up your palm like, hey, this is so good. You're telling them that you're going to explain something like, here, look at what I'm saying, and getting more attention toward what it is that you're saying. So by that, you're adding emphasis to the sentence. Or maybe you're using a computer and you stand up to go print something, and while you're gone, someone sits down and starts using it. You can say to them, 아직 쓰고 있는데요. So I am still using it. Like, hey, I'm still using it. This is something I'm presenting to you. What do you say about this? That sort of way. So it adds emphasis to your sentence. Okay, so now that I've taught you this 대 form, you're never going to use the 고 form or 지만 form ever again. No, I'm just joking. Of course, those forms are still used all the time, but for specific purposes. So anytime you want to emphasize and or but, like you want to say something something and, or something something but, then you should use those forms because they sound stronger. And if you ever get stuck and you can't remember how to conjugate the 대 form or why you should be using it, you're still going to be okay using 고 and 지만 as usual. They're not wrong. And if you learn about those forms in more detail, there are a few other situations where you have to use them. For example, if you wanted to say that you did something and then did something else, you would have to use the 고 form to do that because the 대 form doesn't have the meaning of and then. So if you wanted to say I ate kimchi and then went home, you would still have to use 고 for that. So not to say don't use them, but when you're using them just to mean and or but in a regular conversation, I recommend using 대 instead. It's going to sound more natural. Okay, one more special thanks to my Patreon supporters and YouTube members for helping to keep the lights on here. And I'll have links in the description box below for how you can also become a supporter of this channel. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again next time. 그럼 다음에 또 봐.